The Brewers signing Jose Quintana to a one-year deal in a late addition in the midst of spring training. A couple more injury updates related to a couple of other lefties who were previously going to be in that Brewers rotation mix. Then a couple more standout performances from the last week or so. Plus, the Brewers announcing their spring breakout roster. Spencer will have that in the minor league sandbox at the end of the show. It's the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Welcome back. Before we get too far into the weeds here, Spencer, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Busy week for me. I think it might be even busier for you. So I know we're going to try and make this a quick one. We're going to do our very best to do that. And so I'm not going to bore everyone and waste time with how I'm doing, but overall, great.
Good to hear.
How are you, Jack?
I could be better right now. So do you remember a couple of weeks ago when we talked about at the beginning of the episode about how I only get sick like twice a year? I'll maybe get a cold like once or twice a year. Well, starting at 3:30 tomorrow morning, I begin almost 3 weeks of travel, and I've had my yearly cold for the entirety of this week. This just had to be the week that it hit me. And I was feeling okay for the entirety of the week, but if you can't tell from my voice, the congestion is as bad right now as it's been the entire week before I really need to get some sleep before I have to get up in the middle of the night. So we'll see how things unfold here, but enough about me. Let's jump into the action here. We'll start with the Jose Quintana signing. There had been some rumblings leading up to this that the Brewers were at least a team that was interested in Jose Quintana. There was some speculation that he was getting closer to a deal after he withdrew from one of the WBC qualifiers. He was supposed to start one of those games, but he ended up pulling out of that. So there was some speculation that a deal was getting close, and it ended up being with the Brewers. It's a one-year deal with a mutual option for 2026. That's basically how the Brewers love to make things work with money because you can put a buyout on those. We've talked about this before. Mutual options are almost always about just kicking the can further down the road on the buyout money. So if you actually read through the entire structure of this thing, it sounds a little complicated, but basically what you need to know is this deal guarantees Jose Quintana at least $4.25 million from his time with the Brewers. Could be a little bit more than that with incentives, but the mutual option is for $15 million. That's not getting picked up. It's a $2 million base salary for 2025 and a $2 million buyout on that mutual option, plus $250,000 of incentives for 1 day on the active roster. He's going to be on the active roster for 1 day. Again, it's just kind of some moving the money around type stuff. So that's where your $4.25 million guarantee is coming in. And then with incentives during the 2024 season, he can max out at an additional $1.25 million if he makes at least 24 starts and pitches at least 140 innings. So that's the deal on the money. Jose Quintana is in camp now. Sounds like he's excited to join the Brewers, really shoring up that final rotation spot that previously seemed as if it was going to have a little bit more of an open competition for, but we'll kind of talk about just how the depth was taking a little bit of a hit on that front. But before I dive into my thoughts, Spencer, I'll give you the first word here. Just what's your thought on the signing? Just thoughts on Jose Quintana in general, thoughts on how he fits into this rotation, kind of impacts the outlook of this entire pitching staff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I think it makes plenty of sense for the Brewers to have made the signing. I think whether some of the injuries we're going to discuss in a little bit had happened or not, it would have made sense to solidify the back of the rotation in a way. And I think that's what he's doing. I think this is a guy who peripherals aren't going to back up the production he's had the last 3 years. Really, like even beyond that, but especially the last 3 years where he's been a little older, the stuff is not quite the same level of where it used to be. But he keeps getting results. He's coming to a team that has some of the best defense in all of baseball, so it's not unlikely that he would continue to outperform some of those, expected ERA type of stats and those types of things where it's factoring in batted balls. It makes a lot of sense. I think this is a good fit for him. He talked about that a little bit. I think he even mentioned a little bit the defense, but also just the youth and the energy that the team has and how that can work for him. And I think that is a lot of what leads into the defense for the Brewers is that they're so youthful. They have so many good athletes. So all of that kind of connects. Overall, honestly, I think the biggest surprise in all of this for me is that it only ended up being like 4.25 million in guarantees. I know the report was that they started pretty far apart. I thought Quintana was probably going to get more than this over the course of the offseason, but once you hit spring training, I mean, at some point you have to come to an agreement. And I know there's a rumor at one point that the Pirates had offered at least 5 million, but I guess in this case it means that Quintana preferred the Brewers overall, even though there might have been a slight difference in money, and that they were able to come to an agreement. And yeah, just overall, I think for both sides, it definitely makes a lot of sense. Quintana gets a great defense behind him. The Brewers get a much more sure thing in the rotation than what they were kind of looking at moving forward. And in the end, I know a lot of people had connected him to the Brewers, and not even just there were actual reports of connection, but even just it makes a lot of sense. And it played out that way. It did make sense, and I think they both sides agreed on that. And yeah, I like the signing. I don't think it's a game breaking signing by the Brewers, but I think it's a really nice. I talked about it with like the Canna signing. I think it's a really nice floor raiser for the team, and I think you kind of needed that, especially in the rotation. So those are my overall thoughts on it, Jack. But how I know you had more of a chance to look into it a little deeper, and I know you wrote a little bit about it today. So what did you see?
Yeah, I mean the peripherals are a concern. This is a guy who outperformed basically every single ERA estimator. We're not just talking about a handful here. I mean, I think I had it in the story. So he had a 3.75 ERA last year, but a 4.5 FIP, 4.5 expected ERA from StatCast data, 4.5 skill independent ERA, which is kind of the most complex, or towards towards the end of the spectrum of the most complex ones you can get, that combines like batted balls and plate discipline, but it's also meant to kind of tailor to giving you credit if there are certain things that you are good at. But even that one doesn't see him in that same realm. And then deserved run average from Baseball Prospectus, that had him at 16% below league average. So just about all of these peripherals actually paint him as a below average starter, but the ERA was a little bit above average this year. The Brewers' defense effect is absolutely real here, but these are also real trends. And there were reports that the reason the Mets didn't really want to bring him back was because they were concerned about a lot of these peripheral numbers. I'd be willing to bet that that probably was a pretty big reason why he lingered on the market for as long as he did, and only signed for what he did compared to what you usually see as the going rate for a lot of starters. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of teams that were looking at this guy and think or did think that there's a good chance he turns into a pumpkin. But the Brewers' defense effect is very real. So I think that he's most likely going to kind of regress towards a middle ground between the results and the peripherals. I mean, this is a Brewers team that over the last 2 seasons, no team has a wider gap in the right direction between their ERA and their fielding independent pitching. So this is a sustainable way of keeping runs off the board that the Brewers have developed. So I would expect that the same is going to apply to him. It applied to Colin Ray, Aaron Savali last year, Tobias Myers, basically their entire rotation. And it's going to continue, I'd be willing to guess. So I think there's a reason why he was on the market for this long, but I do think that he's going to be someone who pitches at probably roughly a league average rate. But really what this comes down to is volume. This is a guy who started 31 games last year. He's pitched 13 seasons in the big leagues, and he started at least 30 games in 9 of those 13 seasons. And 2 of the 4 seasons in which he didn't, actually 3 of the 4 seasons in which he didn't. The first was his rookie year in which he didn't start the year on the team. The second was the COVID shortened season. And then the third was a season in which he was so bad the year before and bad during the season that he was demoted to the bullpen for most of that year. So this is a guy who is durable. He doesn't have a laundry list of injuries on his record. But really what the striking thing to me now is you look at this rotation now that Quintana is in tow, especially, and you compare it to what the Brewers started with last year. The Brewers last year were counting on starters innings from DL Hall, Jacob Junis, and Joe Ross. DL Hall had only one big league start to his name. Jacob Junis hadn't pitched as a starter since 2019. Joe Ross had missed 2 seasons coming off of Tommy John surgery, and even before that did not have a track record as a durable starting pitcher. and it blew up in their faces. They did not get nearly the kind of production they were expecting from any of those guys in the rotation. Those three guys combined to make 18 starts, and they all combined to spend a good chunk of the year on the injured list. So now the Brewers have swung in the complete opposite direction. Part of it is you do have Aaron Savali coming back, who has always been pretty durable throughout his career. But even you look at what they did in the offseason, Nestor Cortez, now Jose Quintana, the Brewers are now opening 2025 with 4 starters in their rotation who started at least 30 games last year. And they're all guys who have been around for quite a while. So this is like a complete 180 from where they were last year with how they built this rotation. And I think you have to give them credit for that. You know, we were pretty hard on Pat Murphy for the bullpen usage early on, and I still think that there was justification for that. I don't think either of us have changed our minds about anything we've said about that. But we did acknowledge at the time as well that while he could have done a better job with pacing relievers out, he was also behind the 8 ball and given a pretty tough task because you had Junis and Ross and Hall getting hurt early and not going deep when they were healthy. Like, it was all hands on deck right from the get-go. The Brewers, it seems, are trying to avoid that this year, and I think they have now that they've kind of reshaped this rotation. So it's a shift from basically trying to push guys back into the rotation or into the rotation for the first time. A switch from that to now having established veteran durability. So it's a way different look, and I think that's going to be something that hopefully makes this a lot easier for Pat Murphy. And this also helps the depth elsewhere. You can push now Tyler Alexander and Connor Thomas to the bullpen for sure. Those guys aren't going to have to compete for a starting gig. We'll talk about the injuries as well. That covers the Brewers there. It has a ripple effect on the whole staff to the point where even if Quintana's not great, which I don't think he will be great, I think he'll be basically average. But if he's going to give you the volume that he's known for, it raises the floor, like you said, and it puts you in a much better spot overall as far as managing this pitching staff goes. So unless you have any more thoughts kind of in response to that, we can kind of move on to the injury updates that we have been foreshadowing. So starting with the 2 lefties who, as I mentioned, were previously going to be in the running for that rotation spot that Quintana is now almost certainly going to occupy. Aaron Ashby left his last outing with an oblique strain. He underwent an MRI. All they know from that first reading is that it's an oblique strain. They don't really know a lot about the severity or about the timeline. So he's getting a second opinion, and then they're going to kind of figure out the next steps for that. But I would imagine that while they don't think this is serious, I can't really see him being ready for opening day. Obliques are very tricky. So I think this almost certainly takes him out of the running for opening day. And DL Hall, it already looked like that was going to be the case. Now we know that he's going to be out until at least late May because he was moved to the 60-day IL to make room for Quintana on the 40-man roster. So those 2 guys were almost certainly not going to see them for quite a while. An unfortunate development for both of them because these are both guys who I think did deserve another crack at the starting rotation. It was a little discouraging to see Ashby's first couple outings just because, yes, it's early, but it was always the same things that seemed to be problems anytime you tried to plug him into the rotation. And it's every time that happens, it just seems weirder and weirder to me because, like, he's not even trying to pace himself right now. It's not like he's fully stretched out yet, but again, I'm not the guy who's on the field or on the mound, but it just seems odd to me the longer this keeps going on that, like, he looks like a completely different guy in terms of being able to execute pitches and not let things snowball when he's the first pitcher of a game as opposed to coming out of the pen. And even out of the pen, he'd be going 2-3 innings and somehow it still looked that much different. The stuff is where it needs to be, but just nowhere remotely near the strike zone in his first 2 outings. And then some crappy batted ball luck too that always seems to factor in for him. Always ironic that the Brewers are one of the best defensive teams in baseball, and yet they play some of their worst defense whenever he's on the mound, or so it seems. But he's going to be out for a bit. DL Hall as well. Never even got a chance to see where the stuff is at for him going into camp. He was going to be an interesting one to watch, but we're going to have to wait on him for a while as well. Thomas Pannone, another lefty, veteran lefty, who was not going to start the year with the team, but was going to serve as some veteran depth in the minor leagues. He left his last start early with forearm tightness. That's always pretty ominous. So we'll wait until we get some further updates on him. But those are the big ones to talk about right now. Then a couple of other housekeeping things as far as recovery updates go. Tyler Black made his spring training debut last week, or I should say this week. It's Thursday right now as we're recording this. But he had been out with some back tightness. Yeah. They didn't project that as anything that was going to be serious, but he was back in the lineup this week, went 0 for 3 in his spring training debut. Defense was mixed again. He made a really nice play over the railing where he flew into foul territory over the railing into the dugout to catch a pop-up. And then we also saw kind of why Tyler Black is someone who the Brewers are probably not going to be trusting defensively at first base, with a couple of other not so great moments as that game went on. So nothing major there. He's back in the lineup. I still have a tough time seeing him cracking the big league roster. Spencer, I would imagine you feel the same way.
Yeah, it just does not feel like it's a good fit with this roster. I think if Rhys Hoskins was not on the roster, you could see a path, especially with Canna, because then Black's kind of your lefty hitter, Canna's your righty hitter. I could kind of see that happening, but even then, no matter what the rest of the roster look like, the difficult part for him is that I think he's an outfielder, and I don't think the Brewers have room for outfielders, and I just don't know that at any point he really fits into the Brewers' plans with his inability to do anything at the corner infield spots. I mean, if he could even just get to serviceable at either spot, then it becomes a possibility, but I don't think he's there yet. And like you said, we saw in that game, a good first baseman's going to pick that ball. A decent first baseman is going to at least keep that ball close. And then we didn't see the throw, but I have no idea what happened on that. My best guess is that he tried to hold on to it last second or something and spiked it, and it rolled to the backstop because that thing went like 45 feet and it was rolling by the time it was at the mound. So the whole play was, like you said, it was kind of exactly what you worry about with him defensively, is that he can go full yakety sax mode out there with some of the defensive plays, and it can get ugly in a hurry. So, it's just, I like the guy. I like the bat. I still think it's a major league bat, but I just don't know how it ends up fitting into this roster.
Yeah, and like we've talked about plenty, the problem has never been the athleticism. Like, that's why you still see the plays like he made in foul territory. It's never been the athleticism. It's just he cannot translate that into mastering the fundamentals of any single position, the footwork, the positioning. Just he can't harness it in the infield. We've seen it for a couple of years now. They've tried him at almost every spot they could imagine except for shortstop. It's not happening in the infield. I think it's tricky to see that coming together at this point. There's a reason they've kept moving him around, because, he has not shown any evidence of really getting better at a single spot. So I think it's kind of make or break for him at this point. Can you learn how to play first base? And the fact that we're in year 2 and we're already kind of seeing some of the same things, not his best foot forward as far as, having a chance to really carve out a fit on this roster. But the final update we have on the injury front, Brandon Woodruff, things are continuing to look pretty positive for him. Velocity is still topping out at that 92 range whenever he's thrown live at bats. Last we heard is that the next step for him is going to be a simulated outing with multiple innings. So starting the process of building out just a little bit here. Obviously still on a delayed build-up timeline from everybody else, given what he's coming back from. Almost certainly not going to be on the opening day roster. All you can really hope for at this point is just that there's no setbacks, and that's been the case so far. So as long as things continue progressing on that front, we'll see him back in the rotation at some point. Again, always a conversation of what exactly you're going to get out of him, but everything is looking about as good as anyone could have imagined so far. Probably better, as we talked about, than either of us were expecting going in. So best of luck to him as he continues to try to build up. Spring training highlights now. Well, highlights is in quotation marks here on the agenda because again, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but we always do have a recap section of the podcast. So we'll recap some of what's been going on the field within the last week. Abner Uribe making his spring training debut. I guess we could have tucked this one into injury updates if we really wanted to, but there's a little more of a story here as well. The velocity looking good, hitting 99 on the gun with the fastball. Or did he hit triple digits, actually?
He hit 100, yeah.
I think the first one was 99, and then he got up to triple digits. It was something along those lines. But everything's back where it should be, and that's I know we always talk about velocity with arm injuries, but lower body injuries, seeing the velocity back right away is also generally a good sign. You got to watch the mechanics too, but if he's getting to that velocity, there's a good chance it means that it's because the lower body's healthy. There is a chance that, you're compensating with the upper body, but the fact that he's doing this in his first outing and he is decently removed off the surgery because he was already moving around in the fall last year. Okay. Good sign for him. The question for him though always is it's never been the stuff. It's always been the mental side of the game. And he did talk about post game after his return outing that he really does want to focus on trying to harness that fiery energy he has much better than he has so far. We've talked about how he is going to have to serve a suspension whenever he returns to the big league bullpen because he got into that fight with Jose Siri and the Rays last spring. So he talked about how, he's still going to keep the celebrations. He's still going to keep the positive version of that as part of his game. But he said that the negative emotions, letting that stuff get the better of him, getting into some tussles like he did last year. He said he's done with that. He wants to put that behind him, which good for him. He's going to need to do that. So it'll be interesting to watch him once we get into the regular season and once he gets his next opportunity to show what he can do in a regular season big league game. But always good to see him back on the mound. Good to see that he's apparently healthy and the stuff is right where it needs to be. Just a matter of can he get the command and the mental side of it, which I'd be willing to guess that they're at least a little bit connected because he is a guy who we've seen things snowball on him when things aren't in a great spot. But Spencer, it sounds like you paid a little closer attention to this outing than I did. Is there anything that I'm missing here as we're recapping this part of the agenda?
No, I mean, this was one that was not on StatCast. It wasn't on TV, so it was just mostly following along with the tweets and what we were hearing. But I know Dom Catronio had tweeted some video today, I believe it was, from behind home plate of him throwing and caught a glimpse of the scoreboard showing the 100 on there, and then it was a 3-pitch strikeout as well. So he looked like he's moving well. I think, like you said, the biggest news out of this is that there is it sounds like a bigger focus for him in terms of the mental side of things, and it's really at the forefront of what he's working on. And I really do think we've talked about how there are still, while the velocity is great, there are still concerns with this stuff. But I think the biggest thing that is going to kind of make or break what he ends up becoming is going to be the mental side of the game. And if you can harness that in a positive way, that's not to say that he's never going to show some negative emotion. It's going to happen. That happens to even the most calm pitchers in the world. That's going to happen once in a while. But being able to control the temper more than anything else, and then also not beating himself up when things aren't going well. Like you said, I think you could see it snowball on him once in a while. But also just to end it, I mean, like, I do want to shout him out for doing the interviews in English. You can tell he put a really big emphasis on that. That's really cool. I love when guys are able to start doing that. Like that's awesome. And it allows him to tell his story in a more like, it's his words. It's what he's saying. I think sometimes, I'm not saying translators purposely go off base of what they're saying, but I think it can get lost in that translation sometimes on what's actually meant to be said. And so just hearing it come from him in a language that, most of us in America actually understand regularly, of course, it was nice to hear. It was just nice to hear him mentally. There was no good way I could finish saying what I was saying there, but you know what I mean. It was really nice to hear him talk. It's nice to hear just what his mind is thinking and everything from his own words. And I just generally, I think it's really cool when these guys are able to do that, because I can't imagine trying to do my job in a place where I'm speaking a different language than the vast majority of the people there. And at the same time, where they don't know what I'm trying to communicate all the time. And there's just all this stuff that you have to go through, and you're still trying to do your job, and you're trying to be a major league pitcher, and you're trying to do all these things. So like, I think for them to be able to take the time and still learn the English language. I took Spanish in high school. I don't remember any of that, and I was not good at it, even though I was learning every day. So it's impressive. It's
I
hard
quit
to
after
learn a
1
second
year of
language.
high school.
Yeah. So like, I just wanted to give him a shout out for that, because that was something that I think got pointed out in his first interview, and we haven't really mentioned it. But that's also, I think, a little bit of a sign of maturity too. Like, that takes a lot of work. That's something that you have to put a lot of effort into, and just good for him. Really, really cool.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I had completely overlooked that, but he does deserve a lot of credit for that, because that's not easy. Especially if you're someone who only speaks one language, I think you really have to appreciate it even more.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about, like I don't like sitting down and learning another language. Not that I'm not saying it's, a waste of time or not valuable to do, but I just have a very low patience level for doing those kinds of things. That's a fault of my own, but not easy. And he does deserve a lot of credit for building that up and working on it to the point where he now feels comfortable speaking to the media in English. That's only going to lead to good things for him moving forward. So good for him. All right, you want to talk about Ollie Dunn for a few minutes?
Oh yeah.
We got some Ollie Dunn updates. So,
Oh, were you leading me into Okay, I will lead it off then.
well, no, I
no,
I can talk about it, or you can talk about it. I don't care. I know we're
Okay,
both big Ollie
we've got a
Dunn
little
guys,
bit of a delay, I
at
think,
least
going
the
on with our.
polling.
I think our Wi-Fi is not great today, but I'll lead it off, because I did read Kurt's article on Ollie Dunn today, which had a great quote from Pat Murphy mentioning kind of what we've talked about a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
He said, talent-wise, he has as much as anybody we have. Tools-wise, he has as much as anybody we have. We've mentioned that a number of times. We've kind of drawn that parallel to Garrett Mitchell, in that, like, there's one big flaw right now, and it's bat to ball ability. And everything else is, there's big time tools across the board. In spring, he is crushing the ball. Like we've said, this isn't something where that means it's going to carry over to the major league season or into the regular season, but it is still very good to see the process of what he's been working on, which Kurt wrote about, kind of carrying over early into these spring training games. And the main thing that the Brewers, and Connor Dawson specifically, was talking about in the article, the main thing they had identified is that Dunn was catching the ball kind of too deep into the zone, meaning he was letting it travel too far. So the further it travels, the kind of the less room for error you have in your swing, because you don't have the bat path in the zone for a long time, which allows you to catch the ball sometimes at the deeper part of the zone, sometimes out in front. Out in front is how you actually get to the power that he possesses. So that was a big focus of his. And there's been a number of articles. Matt Trueblood wrote a good one about at Brewer Fanatic about the bat speed, and how he has the bat speed, he has all this stuff. So now it's working on other things, including catching the ball out in front more. And he's got 3 doubles, he's got a homer, but he also is just posting like 107 to 110 exit velocities with quite a bit of regularity, and they haven't even been on Statcast fields all the time. But pretty much every time they have been, you've seen at least 1, if not 2, batted balls leaving the bat at big time exit velocities. And the swing and miss hasn't been there in spring so far. We haven't seen that a lot. We've seen a much improved version of that. And Jake McKibben actually pointed out, even just comparing it to last year in spring training, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it has been,
try to pull them up,
even just comparing to spring. Yeah, even just from spring last year, it's a vast difference. Like he's making a lot more contact. And I think that's a good thing to compare to. That was probably something that should have been a bit more of a red flag going into the season, that he had struggled with it in spring. So the only thing I will point out on that, spring training for non-StatCast games, it's not always the most perfect pitch-to-pitch data. So I think sometimes, I've noticed this, sometimes if a guy strikes out swinging, it will say all 3 pitches he saw were swinging strikes. So that can really ruin the data a little bit, but that only happens on like 1 or 2 fields I've noticed this spring. It seems like they have somebody actually inputting at least where the pitches are going, whether it's a ball or a strike, the majority of the time. But just to make sure that we're clear, it's not exactly perfect on like swing and miss pitch to pitch data all the time in spring training. So either way, there's been a lot of improvement in the things we need to see from Dunn early in spring, and I think that's really good to see. Did you find those numbers, Jack?
So he was at this. I almost wonder if there's a. I don't really trust these numbers because both of these look very low. So 2024 spring training, 54% contact rate. That doesn't even sound feasible as an actual number. He was not whiffing 47% of the time in spring training last year. So I'm just going to throw these out completely because I think at the very least this 24 number looks like garbage. I'm not quite sure where this. I'm on Fangraphs right now.
Like I said, I think that's where that.
I'm on Fangraphs using the StatCast data source, but I'm going to guess this is just junk tracking, or there's something going on where if there were pitches that were not tracked, it was not counted as making contact. Like something's going on here. But that's what it had him at for last year. 2025, it's got him at 65%, which is still terrible, to be clear, because his contact rate in the big leagues last year was 67%. So I'm just going to throw these out, honestly, because I don't really know what to make of these. The actual strikeout rate is way lower.
Yeah,
if
like
you
I
want to look
said,
at something that we can actually, this is complete data. He struck out 36% of the time in spring training last year, which is essentially where his regular season rate ended up. He struck out 39% of the time in the regular season. So far in camp this year, he's striking out 23% of the time. So that's where you can see things are looking a little better. But again, we're talking about 26 plate appearances. I'm basically, I'll look at this again right before they break camp and I'll see if there's anything worth pulling from here. You always got to be really careful about this stuff though.
Yeah.
My take right now is going to be no comment. We know he's working on things. We can't reliably say what the results are of that. We just can't. And I'm not going to play the small sample size game, no matter how tempting that might be.
Yeah.
We know he's working on this stuff. I'll check it again, like right before the Brewers break camp for the regular season. But we know he's working on this, so we'll see if we can get some more tangible signs of progress. But that is the thing he's missing. It's the contact. It's the bat path. This is like hitting 101, like you talked about. Like if you're going to do damage, you got to get the ball out in front where you have your arms out a little more. You can put more into the swing at that point. You're at a point where you're generating more velocity at that point in the swing path. You're going to hit the ball harder there. So the timing's on. That's just how it's going to work. So it's good that they identified that. But yeah, I'm curious to see now how that plays over. I do feel like we're both vindicated by the Pat Murphy quote about how he's got as much talent and as many tools as anyone on the roster. Because I don't know if we've been going as far as to say anyone on the roster, but we've put him up there for sure, probably in the top 5 at least. And I feel vindicated after tweeting that he has a 5-win ceiling a couple weeks ago, and now getting this quote. But good to see that that they've identified some things and he's putting in the work that'll hopefully get him closer to tapping into that ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking
100%.
of Ollie Dunn, Caleb Durbin is the guy who's most certainly in direct competition for Ollie Dunn for playing time at third base right now. And he's actually flashed a little bit of power in spring training. We had talked about how, really the flaw with his profile is he did not hit the ball hard whatsoever in the minor leagues, like really bad hard hit rates. Hitting the ball on a line a lot, pulling the ball a lot. That's how he was able to help that profile play up. So it was always going to be a matter of, is that a sustainable skill that he can bring with him to the big leagues? That's what we're going to find out. But right now, 2 home runs in Cactus League play. And unsurprisingly, they've been to the pull side, pulling the ball in the air. That's always what he's done in the minor leagues. And that's how he was able to get to a double-digit home run total last year, because he was pulling the ball in the air, not hitting it super hard. It was basically the Isak Paredes deal, where you pull
Mhm.
everything in the air and you kinda tuck it right down the left field line where that fence kinda starts to come in a little bit, and you can get some shorter home runs that you didn't necessarily crush. So he's doing that in spring training, although the video of the last one he hit was not like one of those cheap shots. He actually did
Mm-mm.
drive it a little bit more, and it wasn't, like, tucked right down the line. It was, like, straight away left sounds like a bad description, but, like, if you're like, basically right in the middle between the left field line and dead center is where you hit that ball.
Yeah.
So the question that I see you put in the agenda here, Spencer, is there a little more power here than we were originally projecting, or is this just small sample size? He's playing in the heat in Arizona right now, and Cody kind of asked us on Twitter a question based on this: how sold are we on Caleb Durbin at third? Is there a greater chance of a platoon with Dunn? So I'll let you take the lead first here. You can answer the question if you want, but also just talking about, has the power projection changed for you at all, or are you kind of unchanged with where you're at on that?
Yeah, I think just going back to that, I was probably a little bit higher on it than you were at the time anyway, so I'm guessing that probably hasn't changed too much. Um, but like you said, this last one he hit left the bat at 104, so that's a pretty good poke. Those are usually going to get out if you hit it at a decent launch angle at 104 miles per hour. Um, and I think there's kind of similar to like where I've stood with Sal Frelick, where I've thought there was double digit power in there for him. I do think Durbin is probably capable of double digits. Not that he would do it every year or that we would see it consistently, but I think he's a guy who can pop double digits, and it wouldn't completely shock me for the reason you're talking about. It's a guy who you pull the ball in the air a ton, you get a little more room for error if you're doing that consistently. And he showed it in the minors very consistently. Now we're seeing it in spring. I think it's something that'll be legitimately part of his profile. And I think he seems like a guy who kind of has two swings where he goes after a mistake and he really tries to turn on it and pull it. And then he also has like the, okay, I'm shooting a line drive the other way. I'm going to try and put the ball that direction. Something that Sal has actually talked about very recently. I can't remember who wrote the article, but he had mentioned a similar thing where it's like, okay, when I'm not with two strikes, I might go and take a little bit of a bigger swing now than I used to. Now I think that was always Durbin's kind of goal, but we're seeing him pop. He's popped 104 plus multiple times. Not that, again, that's nowhere near big time power, but it is something where if you're hitting the ball in the right direction at the right launch angle, those are going to be homers if you're hitting it over 100. So I think it's in there. Again, I'm not expecting a huge power boost from him or anything, but I think he's a guy who can run into him a little bit more than maybe even we thought at the beginning. And then on the other note, so far defensively, I thought he's looked good at third base. I think he looks comfortable in the games we've been able to watch. The arm holds up enough for me. I don't think it's going to be a cannon by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's fine. And I mean, the way things are trending right now, I think Dunn Durbin is going to be what they go with. Things can change over the next 3 weeks, but just if things keep trending the way they are, they're both performing well. They're both doing things that you kind of wanted to see so far. That gives them a pretty good chance to make a decent pairing. And I should note also, Durbin's been hitting in a tiny sample, but one of his homers was off a lefty. He had some good swings against the lefty. That has been a bit of a concern where some people pointed out that he had pretty big reverse platoons. So again, tiny sample there, but good to see some good swings, I think, off of a lefty, because there is a decent chance that's who he's going to end up facing if they do go that platoon route. So overall, I think we're trending that direction right now for sure.
We've talked about this before, but I definitely think that the Dunn Durbin platoon is what they want to have come together. I think it's just a matter of they need to see
Yeah.
enough from both of those guys. But if Ollie Dunn is taking the right steps that they want to see, like we just talked about for a few minutes. And then if Caleb Durbin proves that he can be, I would say, like an average defender at third base. I think if he's an average defender at third, especially with the arm, that's going to be a big one to watch. My guess is they're probably going to say, yeah, we'll keep it that way, because shortstop and second base are both generally positions where there's more defensive value there. You need more range.
Yeah.
You have two very rangy guys up the middle. I think that really what they're trying to figure out is just, can he play at the very least passable defense at third base, like average defense? I shouldn't say passable, average. I think if he can do that, I think they're just going to roll with that over there. I think that the reason they haven't committed to anything yet is because they're still trying him out over there. Because I think if they fully believed in him as a third baseman, I think they would have gone into camp saying, "Yep, Bryce is going to play second, Joey's going to play short." But they do still want him to prove something over there. I think that's why they've been non-committal on that. But if the glove is average over there, I don't see any reason why they would shift the rest of the infield around to accommodate that. I think they would only do it if they knew that he graded out as a pretty good second baseman and a bad third baseman. I think that's what it would have taken for them to do a little more shuffling and maybe say, hey, on the days that Dunn plays third base, yes, we'll go Bryce at second, Joey at short. On the days that Durbin's in the lineup, we do have to do a little bit of sliding around. My guess is, though, if he continues to look okay over there, I don't think that really stumbling over my words here. I don't think it's going to come to that if the glove is looking nice over there, if it's looking average.
Agreed.
We mentioned, you mentioned Sal Frelick a couple minutes ago, just talking about Durbin. He not only hit an opposite field home run this week, but he also hit his hardest hit StatCast tracked ball of his career. So we don't know for sure that this is the hardest ball he's ever hit. This is just the hardest one he's hit in a stadium that had active batted ball StatCast tracking. The single was 107.7 miles an hour off the bat. That barely topped his previous best of 107.6 on his wild card series home run. And I actually had his full list of top exit velos pulled up on Savant before we jumped into this. I closed it out, of course, because I'm not very smart or very good at preparing for this. But he actually, his top four. So it's this one, the home run. There's another one from like August, and then the fourth one is also from the wild card series where he smoked a ground ball that was like 106 miles an hour off the bat. But all recent batted balls in the grand scheme of things. So I don't know if that means anything per se, but just kind of interesting to me to see that he's like, the point is we had not seen him tap into this for almost the entirety of how long he had been in the big leagues leading up to like the last basically month and a half of the regular season into the playoffs. And then now this spring training hits. So he talked about how he's put on muscle. He's going to have to hit the ball harder than he has so far. So any indication that that's trending in the right direction, something to maybe not overreact to, but something to at least make a note of.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's good to see that, you go into the offseason, you want to add muscle, and now we actually see right away a ball hit harder than you have at any point. It's not something that, again, means anything too crazy, but you like to see the work that people put in the offseason just kind of translate early on. I think that gives one, as a player, that gives you confidence in the work you put in. And I think that can make things a little different. And then at the same time, I can't remember. It might have been an interview even I was listening to with Sal Frelick, but he did talk about how he does plan to have a little bit of a change of approach where he is going to, he doesn't want to get into these 2-0, even 1-0 counts and then just reach out and tap the ball. He's like, I can do that with 2 strikes. He's like, because it does still end up in a place where I can reach base because it's an infield hit and I have the speed and use the athleticism to my advantage and get the ball in play and make things happen. But until I get to that point, he's like, I think there's got to be a little bit more of an attack mindset and trying to hit the ball with a little bit more authority. And I think that's exactly what I would like to hear from him. I don't want him to sacrifice and start striking out a bunch more because he's trying to hit the ball harder. There is value in him being able to put the ball in play with as much consistency as he does. But seeing him hit the ball as hard as he ever has in the StatCast game, seeing him or hearing him talk about kind of the mindset change, all of those things are, again, good signs early on. We'll see how they translate when we get to the regular season, like we've said with all these guys. But it's just nice to see positive things early in spring that feel like they can translate as long as things keep trending the right way.
Yeah, I'll speak for both of us because I think we agree on this. He's never going to be a power hitter. We don't want him thinking like a power hitter ever. But he has the build and the athleticism and the strength to hit the ball, I think, quite a bit harder than he has so far in the big leagues. That's what it really comes down to. So he's again, never going to be someone who has great exit velos, great hard hit rates, whatever. It's always going to be more of the pesky kind of line drive type deal. Work counts, get on base, make things happen with the speed and the bat to ball. But I don't think there's any good reason for him to have like the worst quality of contact metrics in baseball like he did last year. Like he was dead last in hard hit, dead last in barrel rate. I don't know if he was dead last in exit velo, but if not, he was pretty darn close. Like that, there's no reason for that, assuming he's
close.
There's no reason for to be that bad, like that feeble in terms of not being able to hit the ball with authority if he's healthy. So we know it's in there. And now that he's added more muscle, you'd really like to hope that it comes out just a little bit more. I don't know if he necessarily put on the extra weight with that goal. I think that was more about just staying in a healthy spot throughout the entire season. But there's a little more in here where he can at least be a little more well-rounded and be an above average bat. I think that's what we've been expecting from him. And that's what we'd like to see this year. So hopefully he's taking the steps to at least get closer to that. The last thing that I wanted to talk about as far as spring training highlights, this is a random pitching nerd one. But a few weeks ago, I had highlighted Easton McGee as someone to watch as a non-roster guy, not as someone who's going to break camp with the team or anything, but as someone, he's not even on the 40-man roster, hence non-roster invitee, but someone who I think we could see with the Brewers eventually. They signed this guy to a 2-year minor league deal coming off of Tommy John for a reason. He's got the kind of kitchen sink arsenal and funky release, that combination that the Brewers like. But what I was really curious to watch with him in spring, once we got him on StatCast tracking, if we would get him on StatCast tracking, was the cutter. So when he was with the Mariners and with the Rays too, his cutter was not good. It almost always backed up on him. So he wasn't actually getting glove side cut. It was just straight, basically. But after he came back from Tommy John last year and pitched in Nashville with the Brewers, the results are really bad, but the pitch shapes were quite a bit better, specifically that cutter. He was almost always not getting a lot of cut on it, but he was pretty consistently on the glove side as far as movement goes. He was actually getting some cut on it now, and it was pretty consistent. So now he made his first StatCast tracked appearance of spring training, and there was even more cut on it now in that appearance. He was up to, on average, 6.5 inches of horizontal cut, and he got as high as almost 10 inches on it. So it looks like this is a pitch that he already seemed to work on with the Brewers coming off of Tommy John last year, and now it's looking even better, even more fine-tuned now that he's a year removed from that surgery and basically getting to go into not only a full off season, a normal off season, but then come into a normal season for him. So I'm curious to see how that continues to look, because I do think that's a guy that we're going to see at some point, even if it is just for the random late June start, because all of a sudden you have a couple injuries or something like that, or like a 13 games in 13 days type deal where you just need an extra starter. But that's just something I wanted to point out. Spencer, I don't know if you have any thoughts on Easton McGee, but I think it's fun to watch some of these guys. We talk about them quite a bit on the show.
Yeah. He he was a guy who, when he got to Nashville last year, I think I only watched him once, but I was paying a little bit of attention to some of the StatCast data. I didn't really compare it to the Mariners or Rays days. So I didn't, until you talked about it and had written about it and you talked to me about it a little bit. I hadn't really noticed that the cutter had made some strides last year, but I did notice it when I was looking back, and then you were talking about it as well again here. But up to 10 inches is quite a bit of cut. Like that's a pretty big cutter. He's a guy who has been known to have very, very good command coming through the system when he was with the Rays and with the Mariners, and some of the stuff was kind of lagging behind. If you find a pitch that can be like a legitimately strong number one pitch for him, and then throw the kitchen sink at him with everything else, like you said, yeah, there's absolutely a path for him to getting innings for the Brewers and probably being pretty productive in those innings, or at least being able to pitch in a good environment with the type of defense that the Brewers play and everything else. Yeah, he definitely looks the part of a Brewers depth pitcher. He's got kind of everything that they tend to have in those types of arms. So, yeah, interesting dude. I'm kind of excited now to see him in Nashville and see how it goes and see if there's maybe a little bit better results this time around, because he was coming off Tommy John. It was kind of hard to judge too much last year, but even that, I think the velo was up a little bit higher than I expected it to be in the spring outing that he
Yeah, it was.
got. Just I know when he had signed, yeah, he was more of like a touch 90 type of guy for the Mariners, maybe get a little bit higher. And we saw some 93s, I believe. So yeah, it's there's a lot of pretty interesting pieces here, and this is the type of depth that the Brewers pick up. No one knows who he is. All of a sudden he's pitching games, and the Brewers are able to stay in them and they win games. And it's like repeat. It's Groundhog Day. It happens every year. But this definitely seems like the type of guy that can do that for the Brewers. So yeah, good call on that, because I hadn't paid too much attention to it until you kind of put my eyes on it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if I had to guess, I haven't talked to anyone. I can guarantee you as soon as I get to Phoenix, I'm going to try to talk to as many people as I can about it. But I bet they're building around that cutter, because when he came off of Tommy John pitching in Nashville last year, he threw it way more than he ever had before. In this spring training outing we're looking at, granted, he faced all lefties, so they probably weren't going to go as much sinker to lefties. But 11 cutters, 5 curveballs, and then only 2 sinkers and 2 four-seamers. So very heavy cutter in that outing as well. My guess is that's what they're trying to build around, but that can be a fun project for you a little bit as you're watching some Sounds games once we get into the spring here. The final thing that we'll talk about here as far as spring training goes, we got a question from the Ginger. He asked, is there any chance Craig Yoho gets stretched out to become a starter? Seems like he could have 3 or 4 pitches that would work well for him. Any other Brewers relievers that have the potential to be starters long-term? Looks like our long-term rotation is a little bit shaky after this year, so I'll kind of let you mostly take the lead on this one, but I had mentioned this before, probably a couple months ago. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets big league starts somewhere down the line. I don't think it's going to happen right now because the health has always been the concern with him. It's why he didn't pitch much in college. But you're right. He does have the arsenal to start. And if the command starts to fall a little bit too, he gets a couple years into his career, experienced relievers who have pitched well out of the bullpen, moving back into the rotation has become kind of a trend lately. I think he very much fits that profile. So I think if he comes up here and he gets maybe 2-3 good, healthy seasons of effective relief under his belt where the walks are under control, at the very least, if the Brewers don't try it while he's still with the team, I'd be willing to bet that, maybe if he gets traded down the line right before free agency, or if he signs somewhere else in free agency, I think somebody is going to try it with him if things go well out of the bullpen.
Yeah, I agree with everything there. I think when he was drafted, he was somebody that I was very excited about when he was drafted, because I was hoping they would make him a starter at the time. Once I learned a little bit more about the injury history, it made sense that they went the route that they went. It's just hard to build a guy up who really had thrown about 50 innings in the last 6 years of his life going into this first season of pro ball. But like both of you said in the question, and you, Jack, it's a starter's repertoire. It's something that could work as a starter 100%. So yeah, the Jordan Hicks of the world. Now we've got, why can't I think of the guy who blew every game against the Brewers on the Pirates? He's with the Mets now. He was with the Yankees. Clay Holmes. I could remember everything about his career except his name. Yep. So they're starting to do that with different relievers, like you said. And yeah, maybe it's not with the Brewers, but I wouldn't be shocked if he does end up in a starting role. In terms of other Brewers relievers that have the potential to be starters long term, I have weird takes on Dikembe Sanchez, who's like in high A, but other than that, I don't have too many relievers in my mind that make a ton of sense. I mean, it's for the most part they've kind of got 1 to 2 inning guys down there who have 2 or 3 pitches. They keep developing pitches with guys. I would have said early last year, I had talked about it a little bit. Casey Hunt seemed like a guy who could do it because he had a different repertoire. He had 4 pitches that he could throw and decent ones at that. And really he kind of has 5, but either way, guys like that, a name like Aiden Maldonado in the minors is another one I would say maybe they could try. But either way, I think at the upper levels and in the majors, I don't really see other names that make a ton of sense there. Yeah, I'm trying to think through the big league pen. I can't think of anyone else. I do think Yoho's probably the one that would have the most clear path to potentially starting out of all of those guys. So in terms of the long-term rotation, I get the concern from people on at some point, but I also think the Brewers have pretty much proven that they will form a good rotation as the years progress, and I don't worry too much about it. They will find a way to do it, even if they start the year with a Jacob Junis, Joe Ross, and DL Hall combo. By the end of it, Frankie Montas and Aaron Savali will be putting up sub-4 ERAs, and they find ways to make it work. So I don't worry too much about it. They're doing a good job drafting. They're doing a good job developing. A guy like Logan Henderson every day is making me more and more confident he's going to be a starter long term. They'll have options. They'll make it work, but it is a good question because I do think there's the stuff for sure for Yoho to do it.
I'll throw one out here. The Brewers would never do this because number one, they don't need him to do that. And I'm not sure it would actually work, but if he has just a couple of additional decent seasons out of the bullpen, which I don't think is a lock either, just because he kind of sprung up out of nowhere. But I could see like a rebuilding team bringing him in and trying to make him a starter again. Jared Koenig. If he comes in and he's still got like 2-seamer, 4-seamer, cutter, curveball, and if he can bring a little bit of a changeup back, and he's not going to throw 98 still as a starter, but if he's throwing like 92 to 94 this time around as a starter instead of 89 like he was the last time he tried it, I could maybe see that happening. I don't think it would. I think there's a lot of things that have to go right before it gets there. But if there's anyone who I'm looking at where like if I squint and I could see, assuming we're talking about like pure relievers here right now, not like hybrid guys. If there's anyone that I could like squint and maybe see like the Rockies or the White Sox or someone along those lines trying it out, I think that it could maybe happen. It's a long shot, but like doesn't seem impossible to me.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I like that one.
All right. Well, that'll be all you'll hear from me because I'm having a hard time talking at this point. So I'm going to let you not only jump into the minor league sandbox, but then just finish the episode off for us. Sound good?
Sounds good. I will see you this weekend.
Yep.
All right. Jumping into the sandbox here, I don't have a ton here, except I did get some added to my plate today because the Brewers ended up putting out their spring breakout roster. Every team put out their spring breakout roster. So I was going to have a couple underrated players. Honestly, maybe not even as deep cut as some of the other ones I've done, but we'll go through those and then we'll talk about the spring breakout roster as well and just kind of run down who all made it and maybe some names that aren't as familiar to people. But for the underrated players, I'm going to give a bat and an arm again. On the offensive side, I am going to go with Josh Adamshevsky. I've talked about him a lot on here. This isn't really a new name. He ended up getting his first taste of Major League spring training. I think it was a week ago or so today. I think it was last Thursday. But facing the Royals, he sees one pitch from Ross Stripling, and he hits a 107-mile-per-hour home run to right center field. So quite the start there. He came up the next time and hit like a little squibber the other way for an infield hit. But just overall, I really do buy the bat. I think the bat is very legitimate. I think he can hit, and I think he's going to continue to hit. Maybe the one negative with him is that it does seem like he's kind of slotted into second base. Not sure there's the ability to move across and play any short or third. Just in terms of arm strength and everything else, it could be a little difficult for him. But I like the actions at second base. I think he's a pretty solid defender at second. But just a lack of versatility is always going to hurt a guy a little bit as he climbs the ladder. But again, all in on the bat for him. And then the other one is Tanner Shears, a right-handed pitcher. He is coming off of Tommy John surgery. He will be back around June of this year. This is a guy who has, for my money, maybe the most underrated pitch in the system and arguably just one of the best pitches in the system in his splitter. And I've talked before, the Brewers don't love splitters, but if they take the splitter away from Tanner Shears, I might form an uprising and cause some problems. This is a disgusting pitch. So disgusting that at times the catchers can't even catch the ball. He walked a ton of guys 2 years ago, last time he was healthy. At the same time, watching him pitch, he actually wasn't that all over the place. I genuinely believe umpires were having a hard time calling his pitches because they were moving so much and catchers were struggling to catch them. Not to say he has great command, but I think it's probably closer to like below average than terrible, which is what the walk numbers and everything else might tell you. But he's a mid-90s fastball. He throws what I think is a 4 and a 2 seam. It looks like he gets run on it, and then he also has one that's more of like a carry through the zone, try and get up in the zone. And that splitter is just disgusting. I mean, he gets the spin rate under 1,000. It moves so much downward movement. It gets some arm side movement at times too. Just for my money, one of the best pitchers in the system. And he'll mix in an actual breaking ball every once in a while too. But that one's probably a pretty deep down, we really need to go to something else here type of pitch where you're not using it a ton. But we'll see how it looks coming off of Tommy John. Like I said, expected back probably in around June this year. But those are the two names I'm going to go with this week. Two that I'll definitely be keeping an eye on when they are playing. But two names that did not end up making the spring breakout roster. So running down through the list, a lot of top 30 prospects according to Pipeline, which they just updated their list earlier this week. On the pitching side of things, the starting pitcher is going to be Jacob Misiorowski. Not a huge surprise there. Brett Witrowski is on the roster. Bishop Letson. Bryce Message might be our first look at Bryce Message in a game of any sort, really, so far. Greg Yoho, not a surprise there. On the relief side, some names that maybe aren't as familiar. Tyler Bryant, an indie ball signing from last year who can run it up into the upper 90s at times. Really nice looking breaking ball. Fiery dude. He's got a little bit of like the young Corbin Burns look to him with the goggles and the beard that he's got going on. So fun dude to watch. Will Childers, I've talked about quite a few times, but one of my favorite relief prospects in the org. Blake Holub was acquired for Mark Canna last offseason. So Canna's back in the organization, and Holub is still in the organization as well. This is a guy who throws a very vertical fastball that also gets some cut, and he throws it in the mid to upper 90s at times. But he really struggled with command in AAA. He walked a ton of guys, dominated AA. He kind of made the shuttle between double and AAA quite a few times last year, and the numbers were just insanely different between double and AAA. But a guy who, if you see the results start to tick up at AAA, I think the stuff is there. He's another guy I would like to see them let throw the splitter, but I don't think they're going to. I think maybe the most surprising name on this list is Jack Hostetler, undrafted free agent out of a D3 this past year. He was committed to Oregon State as a transfer. We saw him, got some StatCast stat on him. He only threw 5 pitches because he got 3 ground outs in 5 pitches. But we saw him touch 97. He has the cutter, the 4-seam, and the sinker. He also throws a pretty nice looking breaking ball. the fact that he's in here now, again, some of the names for pitchers especially are going to be based on the fact that they might not be available because of the schedule that they have laid out for them. But even then, the fact that he got into a big league game and that they're putting him on this roster feels noteworthy to me. I think the stuff looked really good in the small sample that we saw. So definitely a name I will be keeping an eye on. Kind of feels like if there's anybody out there that could be even close to what Casey Hunt was last year as an undrafted guy, Hostetler is going to be the one I'll be watching for that for sure. And then the last pitcher is Ryan Middendorf. I've talked about him before. Really, really funky delivery, can get it up there into the upper 90s. His one spring training appearance, I think he topped out at like 93, but we have seen him touch 99 in games at AAA. So early into spring training, not shocking to see the velo down a little bit, but another interesting arm potential bullpen piece this year. The catching side of things, no Jefferson Cairo because he is still working his way back from his shoulder injury. But we do have Marco Dingus, Darian Miller, and Matthew Wood. Miller and Wood for me are kind of, for lack of a better term, they're kind of org filler at this point. I don't see too much of like a major league future for them, but they do have some good things offensively. They have good eyes at the plate. Darian Miller is the only person who can rival Luke Adams in terms of getting hit by pitches, so I respect that. But Dingus is one I'm going to be watching very closely. I hope he catches in this game. I would like to see how he looks behind the plate. Guy who was really just a DH at Florida State. He caught at the JUCO that he was at before. I've talked about him before after the draft. He was dealing with he was more or less on his deathbed a couple of times. It was that bad. He was dealing with a disease that was really, really, really taking a lot out of him. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it. He's fought through a lot of stuff. And then he got to Florida State, still pretty debilitated, so he wasn't really able to catch or play the field too much, but he's able to hit. Had a great offensive season. Brewers took him as a catcher. He got a couple of games with the Mudcast. I saw some video of him at Instructs. I saw pop time in like the 1.85 range, which is really solid. I'm going to be very interested to see if he can stick as a catcher, because if he can, I think he's probably the next best catching prospect in the organization after Cairo. So that's one I'll be watching closely. On the infield, a lot more names that people know. Jesus Mate, everyone knows that name by now. I've talked about him enough. Cooper Pratt, same thing there. Eric Patanti, same on that one. Luke Adams, another one that personal favorite of mine, but definitely some questions for him. We got to see if he can be a little more aggressive and still be able to get into some of the power that he has. Inside right now, he just hits the ball on the ground or on a line a little bit too often in order to get to the power. Luis Pena, the other big-time DSL performer. Hope we get a real look at him, but he's another infielder, shortstop, third base. Him and Mate, technically Pena had a better season than Mate on the surface last year, but Mate showed a lot more under the hood. Blake Burke, the second pick of the Brewers draft last year, huge power from the left side. Brock Wilken, going to be a very important season for him. Will be interesting to get our first look at him. I don't think he's been in a major league game yet this spring. Yadier Arianamo, another guy that kind of a funky swing, interesting load. Basically does like a full helicopter over his head in his load, but there's a lot there. He showed a little bit more power this year. I think he's got a great glove at second base. Good athlete. And if the bat can continue to perform, then he becomes somebody you really need to watch. I just worry about that load. Juan Baez, not too dissimilar. Defense took a step in the right direction this past year, though. Not a ton of in-game power yet, but very good bat to ball. Makes pretty solid swing decisions. In the outfield, we have Yoferi Rodriguez. I've talked about him plenty. Braylon Payne, another one, the first pick in last year's draft for the Brewers. I think maybe the guy that changed my mind on him more than anybody post-draft. I've gone from saying like, man, I don't really fully understand this pick to like, if you told me he's a top 100 prospect by the end of next season, it would not surprise me in the slightest. Luis Lara, who's had a solid showing in Major League Camp when he's been with the team, struggled last year in high A. I think he would tell you that, but the defense is fantastic. The arm's really good. If the bat can show a little bit more pop, we're going to be rolling because he's got a lot of athletic ability. Very small dude, probably about Sal Frelick's size, maybe even closer to Caleb Durbin's size in terms of height. But he did look like he put on some weight when we saw him on TV the other day, so that's good to see. The other DSL performer here is Jose Anderson, the outfielder. We have not seen him in big league camp. I wasn't even sure until today that he had come stateside for spring training, but clearly he's here. Another guy who posted quite a bit of power numbers in the DSL. Small signing, but somebody who was getting pretty good reviews even before the season because Baseball America had him as the sleeper to watch heading into the season. And then he posted some big time power numbers. Reportedly has a good arm in the outfield as well. He's been playing center, but probably a corner guy in the future. And the last one is Dylan O'Ray. O'Ray stole a ton of bases last year. He got aggressively moved to Double-A, where he definitely struggled offensively. But he's played infield. He's played outfield. It looks like they're listing him as an outfielder. Just in terms of organizational depth, outfield makes more sense for him right now because while the major league team has a ton of outfield depth, that is not the case at the upper levels of the minors. So I'd imagine he's going to play a decent amount of outfield this year, most likely back in Biloxi. But yeah, that's the whole roster. A lot of interesting names. I didn't mention Casey Hunt. He is also on the roster, but he won't be active. I'm assuming that is related to the timing of when he is pitching, either in big league games or in his minor league games. But I don't think it's anything related to any injury, at least from what we have heard to this point. I believe it's just based on timing. So that's the whole roster. And that will kind of wrap up the minor league sandbox. And as Jack noted, he bounced out. We are both about to make our trip down to Florida for our coaching job. So he has a lot to pack for and a lot to get ready for. And he's leaving very early tomorrow. So Jack's done, but that's going to wrap it up for us as well on the whole. If you want to follow the podcast, you can follow it on Twitter at BF_pod. You can follow Jack at @ByJackStern. You can follow myself at SMichaelis234. We really appreciate all of you listening. Hopefully you've been enjoying them. We're getting closer to the regular season. And once we're there, we're going to be keeping up with this just as much, if not more. So we'll try our best to be back next week. We're planning on it at the moment, but like I said, we will both be not in Wisconsin. We'll not be in our normal areas. So we're going to see if we can make it work. Hopefully we'll be back with you next Thursday. Go Brewers.